Oregon favored by 16.5 against Oregon State. I think that is crazy high. They started at like 20 and then it got down to like 14.5. Now they've gotten themselves back up to 16.5. It looks like the odd makers don't know what to do in this situation because on paper, Russ, Oregon is the far better team. On paper, Oregon has more talent. Oregon has better players. Oregon has better coaches. However, you have seen Oregon struggle against FCS Idaho. You saw Oregon not be able to stop the run against, granted, a very good running back in Ashton Gentry over at Boise State, but still not able to stop the run. And honestly, if they didn't get some special team scores, they lose that game. And so this is going to be a huge game for Oregon to prove that they can come out and beat an Oregon State team that should not be as good as them, obviously by the odds, but that's happened with the last two teams. And the last two teams, it was a 10-point game and a 3-point game. So, Russ, I'm really curious your thoughts on this Oregon team, them struggling so far and what they've looked like against other teams, and then how you think that will translate into this game against Oregon State.
Yeah, so Brian kind of took the words out of my mouth there, saying take Oregon State in the points. That's kind of what I recommend against, with Purdue Notre Dame as well. Of course, I'm a Purdue fan. I'm going to be positive. I'm going to predict a Boilermaker win, but almost 10 points against Notre Dame when they just got beat by Northern Illinois and it's at Purdue. I would say the bet is take the points. And again, in this one, 16.5, like you said, is high. Oregon is the better team. Oregon should be able to pull this off, even though it is at Oregon State. Oregon does not want to blunder in its first season in the Big Ten. They do want to bounce back. I think someone else said in the comments, Philip, yeah, good teams tend to get embarrassed, tend to bounce back. That goes for Notre Dame. That also could go for Oregon, even though they didn't lose. There's a lot of talk about now it's just Ohio State in the Big Ten or maybe just Ohio State and USC. Like people are starting to dismiss Oregon's chances, even though they're undefeated. And, yes, they didn't look good. Yes, it took special teams, but Boise State has been historically one of the better G5 programs. That's also, I believe, the first time in program history they actually beat Boise State. So they got a monkey off their back. So, these good teams that have talent, sometimes they struggle all year. Sometimes all of a sudden it just clicks to get the ball rolling and you forget about those struggles early in the season. So, you could see that happening against Oregon State. It is a rivalry game, so I don't expect them to cover the spread. Oregon State has also not looked great. Idaho State is not – Idaho State, I think, got beat by Idaho, who was Oregon's week one opponent they struggled with, like 61-7 or something like that. Like that blown out. Yeah. They aren't even on the same plane as Idaho. So, and then, again, it's all about protecting the quarterback, right? Controlling the trenches, keeping Dylan Gabriel clean. When he's got a clean pocket, I think he's close to 130. Was it 125.9 passer rating? When he's under pressure, it's 85.1. So the recipe, similar to like what Purdue's got to do against Notre Dame, Oregon State's got to get after the passer, and then they got to control the line of scrimmage on offense and be able to run the ball and be a dual threat offense against Oregon when they have the ball.
Yeah, for sure. That's what Oregon's been able to do with their defensive line. They've been able to get to the passer without having to blitz, and that's been a good thing for them. However, they've not been able to stop the run as well. Oregon State has a better running game than I think some people give them credit for. They had a good game against San Diego State, and they shut out San Diego State, future conference member San Diego State. So, that's a huge piece for Oregon there, or for Oregon State there. I'm glad you mentioned it's a rivalry game, because Dan Lanning is 1-1 against Oregon State, rival, and he's 0-3 against Washington, their rival. So, I know people love Dan Lanning. I know the Oregon fans love Dan Lanning, but, Russ, could you imagine if Ryan Day started out 0-3 and 1-1 against his rivals? It would not be pretty at all. People would not be pretty. For his head.
Yeah, exactly. If Ryan Day couldn't beat Michigan in the last few years, that'd be crazy.
Right. He has one win and then he lost 3 straight. So if people are already mad about that, imagine if he started only losing 3 in a row and didn't win any. So, it's really interesting to see how the Oregon fans treat Dan Lanning. I tend to agree. I think Dan Lanning is a very promising head coach. Do I think that he's like a top 5 head coach in college football right now, like some people say? No, I don't think that much, but I think that he has a lot of potential and he can be a very good head coach. But this season right now is going to be a test for him. Can he bring this team together? Because I see a lot of players playing for themselves right now on Oregon. I see a lot of players kind of doing their own thing, and I don't know if that's selfishness. I said it seemed like a selfish football team a couple days ago. I don't know if the players are selfish or if they're just not playing as one unit. The offensive line definitely is not, and part of the reason why is because they keep switching out their center. It's one thing to switch out your guards. It's one thing to put a different tackle in there, but they keep swapping out their center right now, and so they have no consistency with the person snapping the ball. If the guy who's in there who can snap the ball well, he's getting blown off the ball. The guy who's in there that does a good job blocking, he's giving Dylan Gabriel bad snaps. So they're going back and forth, and it really gives you no confidence in your center. And then Dan Lanning comes out this week and he says, "Well, yeah, we're going to continue to rotate at the center position." And I'm like, dude, you can't do that. It's already pretty unheard of to rotate your offensive line in general, but to rotate your center position, like we just talked about Minnesota rotating some of their offensive linemen earlier. I think it was on Tuesday when we talked about that, and I was kind of questioning that, but I was like, you know what? They did it back in 2019, and they were 11-2. So who am I to be against it? You know what they did back in 2019, and what they're doing this year though? Their center is getting all the snaps. Their center is not rotating out. And so with Oregon doing this with their center, I think it's a huge mistake, and I think it's something Dan Lanning has to learn from. I think he's pressing a little bit right now. I think he's stressed because he feels the pressure of knowing that this should be a national championship contender right now. But you're not going to be a national championship contender if you're struggling against Idaho. And all respect in the world to Boise State, because they'll probably be the G5 representative in the playoffs this year. But you can't struggle against Boise State after struggling against an FCS opponent in Idaho. So I'm concerned about this offensive line. I think Oregon State could take advantage of it and could find themselves in a situation where they're getting to the quarterback more often than Oregon is comfortable with. I'm curious your thoughts on it, though, Russ. Am I overreacting to the offensive line situation? Or are you with me and you're like, man, this doesn't look good?
Yeah, like we just talked about with the Purdue situation last year with our O line. So you're preaching to the choir with somebody dealing with shuffling O linemen in and out. It's not good. It's not good. It's you have to get the one unit that needs to be most cohesive on the field is your O line. And if they are constantly you're switching guys and they call things differently because you're talking about just one guy being good at snapping and bad at blocking, one guy being bad at snapping, good at blocking, but what about their reads, their communication with their linemen? Because they've got to kind of run that line, right? So if they're seeing things completely differently and they're trying to get used to different voices in a hostile environment, which I'm sure this will be at Oregon State in a rivalry game where they also probably smell some blood in the water like Purdue, I think that you have got to get that figured out and you've got to pick your guy and stick with him this Saturday and let him know that that's the case too. So they're not looking over the shoulder going, if I struggle with snapping, but I'm good at blocking, if I have one bad snap, am I out of the game now? And then the other guy comes and gets thrown in the game and he goes, crap, if I let Gabriel get blown up the first play, what's going to happen? You can't have them kind of playing over their shoulder like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that goes into these players' psyche more than I think some people realize. If you are afraid to make a mistake, there was a story last Ohio State game when they played Michigan where the quarterback was yelling to the team and he was like, "Perfect game, no mistakes, nobody make a mistake," and it was like, okay, it's good to say no mistakes, but like if you're playing so tight that you can't make a mistake, then like are you really playing? They always talk about, play free, play fast, because the best players play free. Like you make a mistake, you get over it because your athleticism and your ability to play, you're going to make the right play next time. If you're constantly thinking about, oh, I can't make a mistake here, I got to think through this, I got to think through that, you are not playing as fast and you're not playing as well because you're overthinking every little thing that happens. And unfortunately, that could be what's happening at the center position for Oregon. If you're thinking about the snap every single time you get out there, oh, if I snap this ball too low, I'm going to get benched. Oh, if I snap this ball too high, I'm going to get benched. That just makes it worse. And the same thing with getting blown up off the ball and letting a guy get by you. It's just going to make it worse. So I think Dan Lanning needs to instill some more confidence in his offensive linemen right now. I think other players, they are very good players and they should be confident. Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Dylan Gabriel needs some more confidence in his wide receivers. He's not throwing the ball down the field well enough. I mean, he's got a high completion percentage, but he's just not throwing the ball downfield nearly enough. So it's going to be interesting. Russ, one more thing, and then we'll get to some of the comments. I know people are commenting. We'll get to those in just a minute, everybody. The run defense. Okay. Am I overreacting to saying the Oregon run defense is troublesome, or are you one of those people that you're like, no, Ashton Gentry is just a really darn good running back, and he just had a good game against Oregon. Nothing you can really do about that. What's your thoughts on the run defense for Oregon?
So I'm going to take the way out, and I'm going to say it's a little bit of both, right?
Okay.
It's one of those situations where we're only 2 weeks into the season, right? Like there's the games we're talking about are a lot of feel out games, a lot of really good. Okay, now we're going to have 3 weeks worth of data to go. What is this team really? Because we get stuck in our ways before the season starts and go, Oregon is 100% a national title contender. But then they might finish 8-4, and you go, okay, well, yeah, because they had this new piece, this coaching staff change, they had a transfer quarterback. You get that. So with Boise State, we could be talking about a Heisman contending running back at the end of the season, or we could be talking about a guy that like he just went off against Oregon. And of course you look back and go, well, yeah, Oregon should have been worried because that was the guy's best game of the season. So it's something you definitely got to short because as a Big Ten team versus a G5 team, you should be able to control the line of scrimmage and not let a guy go off on you like that. It's definitely one of those. It's a little bit of both. Like that guy is a talented player, but the talent you have on Oregon and supposedly the bottomless pit of NIL money you're going to have where you can pick the guys you want, you should be able to stop no matter who it is across, whether it's a Boise State running back or you're talking about Travion Henderson.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a good point. All right, let's get to some comments really fast, and then we will do our score predictions. All right, I think we start. Brian, take Oregon State and the points. I agree. That's just a really big line. I don't think Oregon's gonna blow them out there. Can't trust the Ducks. The Beavers will cover. Philip says. Brian also says Oregon will probably win, but unless their lines of scrimmage have gotten much better this week, it'll be closer than it should be. I agree. And then Brian follows it up down here with the Oregon lost their running back coach Lachlan to Ohio State. Yes, and have a new O line coach could have something to do with the struggles. That's a great point. If you have a new O line coach in there, he might be trying to have a hard time working through these rotations and working through the guys that he wants in there, trying to figure out who he can trust, who he wants to put in there. So that's a good point there, Brian. Thank you for bringing that up. Brian also says Dan Laney is getting a lot of hype, but the results aren't living up to the hype. Yep, especially in the road rivalry games. And then we have Zach here with us from Big Ten Football Talk. Thanks for being here, Zach. He says Oregon State will upset Oregon. Did you choose that? Did you? What was your score prediction, Zach? Remind me what your score prediction was. I don't
He's
think you
Mr.
chose.
Upset, man. Zach is like, let's do these upsets, man. When I did the Purdue episode with him, he was like, all right, yeah, I'm picking more Purdue upsets. Let's go. Like he's just upset guy.
If you really get him going with it, he'll get excited because when we got to that Purdue Notre Dame game, oh, he did choose Oregon State, 27-24, Oregon State. Okay. Um, we got to that Purdue Notre Dame game when we were doing our preview. I was like, I think Purdue can win this one. And Zach was like, but are we going to pick Purdue? And I'm like, I am. He was like, okay, fine, let's pick.
Exactly.
He's
Like I
all
think
about
on
the
his
upset.
his like he was more generous to Purdue when you guys did it together on your show, but on his show when he picked Purdue's Big Ten record or all Big Ten teams records, he had us 2-7 but beating Penn State. Like that's insane.
That's one of those seasons where it's like, well, we did something, but it wasn't so great overall. That would be interesting. All right, one last thing before we get to records. I will remind everybody. So Oregon and Oregon State, the last four meetings. Oregon State won in 2020. Oregon won in 2021. Oregon State won in 2022, and Oregon won in 2023. So for us, are we due for an Oregon State win? They've gone back and forth every other year since 2020. Are we due for an Oregon State win? What's your score prediction?
I do not think so. I'll be rooting for him. This will be the game outside of Purdue that I'll pay the most attention to because we do have Oregon and Oregon State on our schedule later this year.
Mm.
And actually Oregon State is our next opponent after this weekend. So I also don't want them maybe coming in with too much height because if they knock off Oregon, end up being like a top 15 team, and we're going into Corvallis playing a top 15 team, that's a lot tougher test, I think, than a 2-1 Oregon State team that's a little bit reeling. So, but I do think that Oregon State covers. I think you're looking at a close game, similar to what Zach predicted. But I'm thinking that Oregon pulls it out, and it's something like we'll go 34-30 Oregon.
34-30. Okay. I like the 30 projection. Oregon has scored 31 to 38 points, somewhere in that range in each of the past four games. It's actually been Oregon State that's been a little bit more sporadic. Last game, they only scored 7, But in 2021, they scored 41. So it's been a little sporadic for Oregon State. I think the key for Oregon State in this one is to take care of the football and have more time of possession and keep Oregon's offense off the field and keep their special teams off the field as well. I think if they do that, they will win. However, I think Oregon's offense is going to find their explosiveness, and the offensive line, I think, will still continue to struggle, but I think that the offensive coordinator, Will Stein, will try to scheme around that a little bit. So my prediction is Oregon 34, Oregon State 28. I think it's going to be a close one, so I would not be surprised if Oregon State wins. However, it's just Oregon is too talented. Oregon has too much firepower. They should win this game. I don't think I can pick against them with all the talent they have. So, John Hawks says he thinks Oregon is going to get well in this game, and then he says Purdue will beat Notre Dame. There we go. John's predicting it too. So, got all kinds of Purdue beating Notre Dame predictions.
Pull it up, John.
Yeah, here we go. And then Big Ten football talk. Hey, do you trust James Franklin at Ross-Ade? That's a good question there. Do you trust James Franklin at Ross-Ade, Russ?
He should have lost last time he visited Ross-Ade, but we couldn't pick up a first down. So
was that 2021 when you guys went to the Big Ten championship?
Yes, it was the Puke 6 game. It was we played it was the season opening game for us on Thursday night on Fox. And right. We had the ball twice with less than 5 minutes to go, and all we had to do was get a first down on either possession. Failed both times, and Penn State went down and won it at the end.
That was
painful.
That was the season that inspired me to start covering the Big Ten. I started covering the Big Ten last year. I just did college football on TikTok in 2022. But in 2021, I picked Purdue to win the division that year in the Big Ten, and they won. So I was hey, maybe I'm pretty good at this. I found out I'm okay. I'm not great, but I'm okay. Hey, Russ, if the wins get vacated, you could have yourself a Big Ten national or a Big Ten champion.
Oh, it's not if. We've already made the banners. Blue Express is already. We already consider ourselves Big Ten champs. That's done deal. Done deal.
I don't think it works if they're vacated, but they might make them forfeit it. I don't know. That would be
so. Random sidebar since you kind of went there. So I do live in the Louisville area where our coach at the time, Jeff Brom, is now at Louisville, who was at Purdue at the time, and he and his coaches show this past week talked about kind of getting used to the headsets and how it's been a learning curve. But he goes, his words were, but that's something we've got to learn how to do if we don't want to get Michiganed. So he's definitely, I think, a little salty over that season and that Big Ten championship game, because that was a decent game. It was a one possession game in the fourth quarter, that Big Ten championship game with Michigan. So if they had a few calls, that could have been the difference.
I've always wondered if maybe it was kind of like the TCU thought, where like Michigan thought they weren't going to face TCU, so they didn't scout them as much. Like, did Michigan think they weren't going to face Purdue, so they didn't scout them as much? Because you're right, in the first half it was a very close game, and then it was in the second half where they kind of went ahead. So I'm wondering if Connor Stallions really picked up on the signs come the second half, and that's when that started working out more. I don't know. We're going full tinfoil hat here.
He went in at halftime, and he got the cell phone footage from whoever he sent to the Purdue game and goes, "Hey, I actually do need that. Can you send that to me?" Got the calls, came out in the second half, got it done.
There you go. Yeah, he got it uploaded to the Google Drive. So that, which I listened to a podcast today. Apparently, that's what one guy believes they were using. He's dug into this a little bit, and he said that he thought they were using Google Drive, which, like, how stupid can you be? You have your payments on Venmo public, and you're using Google Drive? Like, I don't know.
But Harbaugh had no idea. Sorry.
Yeah, Harbaugh had no idea. Brian says, has Purdue upgraded their visitors' locker room yet? Jim, he calls him Hairball. Harbaugh was pretty upset with them.
Yeah, they're upgraded. They're not the same they were back 10 years ago when he was complaining about the locker rooms. It's a newly renovated Ross-Ade. Very nice. If you haven't been there and you want to check out Big Ten stadiums, very nice.
I was going to say, I heard they renovated it. What was that, 2022 or last year?
The offseason going into last year. They closed in our horseshoe, and they added a tunnel as an entrance instead of our players having to go all the way down to the open into the horseshoe and then coming in. Now there's a tunnel that they come through, and they named it after Joe Tiller. So it's Tiller Tunnel.
That's right.
Pretty decent entrance. Tunnel. Yeah.
That's pretty